welcome to Good Morning BSN. Welcome to Good Morning BSN. My name is Okere, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Tuesday Zoominar at this rather early hour. We want to thank you very much for joining our session. Today on Good Morning BSN, we will provide practical tools and insights to improve your skills in one of the 4 pillars of leadership, which we at BSN believe are crucial to making a difference. This Zoominar will teach you something that you can apply into your organization, something that you can use in your business, or something that you can even apply into your work life. We will end our session today at 8:53 a.m. sharp, so that we can give you a short break before your working day starts. Today's topic is hiring on merits, experience, or organizational culture. This topic focuses on one of the pillars of leadership, which we refer to as performance leadership. The idea is, how do you build an organization that can ensure that you perform effectively and ensuring that you bring in the right people to contribute towards making that organization perform ultimately. Good Morning BSN, our program today, is organized by the BSN Impact Center for Great Leadership. The center is an initiative of BSN, and it is generously founded by Hofstede Insights, the organization which incidentally I work for and which our speaker today is coming from. And the session is also sponsored by the new energy company Chint Global. The Impact Center for Great Leadership is a platform where BSN alums and other managers and leaders from companies and society will meet to share insights and create practical knowledge. You can also contact us in the center for in-company programs to grow your talent and your teams within your organization. We're happy to help you with these programs. We're also happy to help you with specific research to help your business perform better. Today, we are glad to have Egbert Schram and Ellen Doka to discuss this important topic about hiring, whether it should be on merits, experience, or organizational culture. Egbert Schram is the global CEO of Hofstede Insights. He's my friend and my colleague, and I'm so glad to welcome him here. Egbert has spent several years working in the fields of organizational culture, national culture, and consumer culture intelligence. One of the areas of organizational culture that Hofstede Insights works on, of course, is how to build the right kind of work atmosphere, including hiring the right people to work with your organization. Egbert will be talking to us today about how to hire. And Ellen Doka will be reflecting on Egbert's presentation. And Ellen Doka is a promising BSN student, but she also has experience in program management, project management, and management consulting as well. It's my pleasure to welcome Egbert and Ellen to this program. I will start now by asking Egbert to please make his presentation. Egbert, over to you.
Thank you, okay, and also thank you to all BSN members for the kind invitation to today. Also, thank you to Alan, although I'm not yet sure how you're going to evaluate my presentation. I trust it'll be positive. Jokes aside, just a very quick check that my screen is visible. The audio is audible.
Yes.
Wonderful. So then let's get started on this very important topic. Do we hire on merits, on track record, or on culture fit? I'm pretty sure all of you have heard the word culture fit. Some of you might have seen the word culture ad, and that is probably partly what I'm going to talk about today. Why probably? Because let's see where today's presentation leads us. I think when we talk about hiring, the first thing we need to be mindful of is that as people, we are all similar. We're all people. And in the triangle or pyramid that you see on the right-hand side, you see a couple of layers. Layers that can help us to anticipate, to some extent predict how might people be behaving. Now, the challenge in traditional recruiting is that most of the recruitment efforts tend to be solely focused on the top part of the pyramid, meaning we look at personality. We look at somebody's individual's performance, track record, CV, education. We might test their aptitudes, their skills, their abilities, but do we really work alone? Just pause for a moment for yourself. Ask yourself the question, do you really work alone as an individual, or do you work in a team? And is that team part of a larger organization? And to which extent has any of your past track record, CV, education influenced or is influencing your behavior today? This is the case I will be trying to make today, that recruitment in the classical sense is not geared up to really understand, is the person that we're going to hire going to fit into our team? That's the first observation. The second observation, if we have a better understanding of that individual in relation to the team in which they will be working, how might we therefore adjust our onboarding processes? And the reason why all of this is important is because if you look across the globe, retention figures are going down, meaning people tend to work less time at the same employer. And more often than not, I would argue the fact that people leave is not due to an inability. It is not due to them leaving a manager, as is often said. People leave managers, not companies. I would argue the exact opposite. People don't necessarily leave bad managers. They leave a culture that doesn't fit them, because it's quite easy to avoid your manager, especially if you have a desk job. It is really not that difficult. Zoom might have even made it easier because camera off, manager doesn't see what I'm doing. Or, I'm sorry, kids in the background, I need to dial off. Culture fit is, for most organizations, that one thing where they struggle the most, because most organizations don't even know what is their actual culture. Evidence shows in a research amongst 2,000 CEOs, CFOs, that only 15% of them actually know what their real organizational culture is. Only 15%. Let that sink in. Now, moving forward, when we understand the fact and when we accept the fact that we're all human, recruitment should first and foremost be, in my opinion, aimed around the three concepts that we need as people. We all need to feel appreciated. We all need to feel a sense of belonging. And we all need a sense of purpose. But where culture comes in is translating how are these things expressed in day-to-day behavior. I'll give you a very simple example. A feeling of appreciation for you as an individual. How would your team or your organization go about making you feel appreciated? I am Dutch. That means that I have been pre-coded to not want to stand out. If an organization would make me appear as the best student, the best employee, I would personally feel very uncomfortable with it, because what might others think of me? For others, if you're not recognized as that top performer, you might feel demotivated because you've always been praised, and now you come into a team where that behavior is not shown. It's a subtle thing, it's a gut thing, but this is where culture comes in, and this is where culture can make or break successful recruitment. Moving into that connection to practices. Earlier, I mentioned that only 15% of CEOs really know what their culture is. It becomes even more complicated, because when you're recruited by an organization, are you recruited by that organization, or are you recruited by a particular team? And to which extent does that team culture resonate with the corporate culture? And if we think about an example that you see in front of you, this is a team assessment result, so this is what we use to assess team culture. We see a practice such as, we don't get any guidance whatsoever. I'm Dutch, fantastic. It means I can do whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. But if I'm American, the chance is very high that after a while, I would feel disparaged because I don't feel a drive in this team. I don't feel it's clear on its priority. So how can I make sure I'm accountable? So it might take a while, but at some point, this will make or break the placement. If I come from a culture that needs a lot of predictability, let's say Japan, and I don't get any guidance, how do I know to organize my work? No matter how competent I am, it's the gut that will connect to my emotional experience day in, day out. And even when I feel that my technical competencies might fit to the organization, the fact that day in, day out, I'm encountering an environment where I get no guidance whatsoever will influence my motivation. And that might lead to people perceiving me as less competent than I am. We can take another practice. Humor has its place. We started the session today before everybody dialed in with a bit of joking. But what if I come from a culture where joking about the job is seen as discrediting the job? So how do we go about all of these practices and the emotional fit? This is where culture plays such an important role. Now, the question is, how can you take this into account proactively? This is where data comes in handy, because what we do and what we need to do ideally is aligned with how we feel about what we do and what we need to do. All of us can work against our values for 2-3 years. It's really not that difficult. Pay people enough money, give them enough learning, give them enough status, and they'll last. But I can guarantee you, after 2-3 years, you'll be recruiting a new person. Because after 2 to 3 years, those incentives, that exchange rate becomes less favorable. As an organization, you might no longer be able to increase salaries. You might no longer be able to increase learning, and then people might move on. So how do you go about ensuring culture fit or culture add is about start to understand the trends in the emotional preferences amongst the team in which you will place a person, assuming that team will be the team where that person will spend most of their time. And again, recruitment is a huge topic. So whether we recruit people in a team or for a matrix position, the core ideal situation is that the people, the team with whom you work most should ideally make you feel the best. Understanding those value preferences inside the team will also help you to provide much better onboarding experiences. Because if I recruit somebody that needs guidance in setting their targets, if I am as a manager, if I don't know this, I might think, well, I'll throw you into the lion's den. Good luck. This is the way I learned, because this is the way we do things around here. But if I am somebody that needs a bit of guidance, that will wear me out and I will leave before my probation time is up. Or I might be kicked out because I'm not performing. And is that really fair? Is that an ethical situation whereby we dump people into a work scenario based on their CV, which says they have the skills? Skills can be measured, so can culture fit. And that also brings us to culture add, because sometimes you want to change the way in which a team works. And that is where that connection between culture and personality becomes important. Because the moment you recruit somebody in order to change a team, some personality traits become more important. And paradoxically, one of the personality traits, which is related to somebody's ability to stand tough emotional times, is a lack of cultural interest. And the logic goes there. People that are less emotionally intelligent tend to care less about emotions. And sometimes when you want to change a way of working, that is precisely what you need. Because what is holding us back in some cases, if we talk about recruiting for change, it is precisely those emotions, those attachments to the things, how things used to be. So recruiting people that are less emotionally intelligent, conversely, actually will help you to fasten up change. And that makes for an interesting story. I think on that note, my 15 minutes is up. I can easily continue talking for way longer. In case you hadn't noticed, culture is a topic of great passion. But I think at this point, I will hand it back to OK, I believe.
Thank you very much, Egbert. Thank you for the presentation. I will now turn to Ellen Doka, for her reflection. Ellen?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the insightful presentation. My duty is just to give highlights of the subtext. What I put is that there are 3 layers when recruiting. There is the inherited learning, which is at the individual level. There is the collective level, which is learned. That's the national culture. And then there's the universal level, where it relates to the human nature. So the main focus is on the value of culture on recruitment. It appears organizations, given the 15% of CEOs not even knowing their culture, shows that organizations are not paying attention, or some organizations are not paying attention to the value of culture on recruitment. And when people are recruited, they yearn for a sense of belonging. They yearn to be appreciated. And sadly, there is a pre-coding, which sometimes is related to nationality and the level of education or whatever it may be. Secondly, when people are recruiting, there is the team responsible for the recruiting. Their perceptions when they hire or when they make a decision to hire may not quite align with the culture of the organization. What they look at in the individual may not quite be what the organization is looking for, or vice versa. As such, it is important to motivate employees at the different levels of their onboarding process, whether it's at inception or they are now in the organization and moving on. Financial benefits and other benefits play a key role, but only for a season. Beyond that, a person probably wants more than just the financial benefits. As such, it is important to personalize training and what a person expects from an organization, be it it's boosting their morale, it's training, it's guiding them, whatever it may be. They want to be a part of a team, but the organization has to look at the different individuals, the different personalities, and bring on the table what motivates them. And then lastly, just on my own research, some organizations are moving from the traditional based recruiting of degrees and certificates and diplomas, and looking at skills-based and merit-based recruitment, which adds on to the staff motivation and which also reduces costs. In short, given the time that I have, that is what I picked. So in conclusion, culture is important, and culture must be taken into play when recruiting and after recruiting. In fact, the entire onboarding journey and the journey of an employee-employer relationship must always ensure that culture comes into play. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you for your reflection. And now the floor is open to everyone in the program for your questions. If you have any question on the topic of today, which basically is hiring, is it on merits, experience, or organizational culture, please feel free to raise your hand so that we can call you up and you would ask your question. Otherwise, you could also type in your question in the chat box and we will allow you to speak. Yes, Frodo, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is during the presentation, quite soon there was the solution was that organizational culture is what I understand from it, the most dominant factor. But my question is, where does merits and experience come in? What is the balance, or can you share some insights about that?
I would say that in general, if a placement is a short placement, you could argue that merits, track record, could come in handy because a fit is less needed. Everybody knows that this is a 6 to 12-month placement or a 2-year placement. So we're here to get a job done and forget about the emotions. So that might be one perspective. At the same time, having said that, when people have a more incremental fit to the culture, things simply do flow faster. So it's kind of like a two-sided sword. In the short run, merits can help if it's a very task-oriented organizational culture. Also, if the national culture is all about immediate accountability, forget relations, just get your job done. In that case, merit-based recruitment, I would argue, stands a chance, because the overall focus, the organizations, the people that are working there, it's all about getting the job done. That is not to say that I wouldn't argue to also there look at the value fit, because it simply flows easier. It's kind of like an engine analogy. The moment you put the right lubricant in an engine, you might actually get what you need, whether that is high performance, longevity, duration. An engine that is geared for high performance will function with an oil that isn't. It just might not be as good as it could be. And that's the same in, I would say, culture and recruitment.
And in addition to what you tell us now, are there some practical predictors of cultural fit for example, small and medium-sized companies that do not have big budgets for human resource sourcing, etc., etc.?
There I would make a sales pitch in the sense that our Culture Compass teams can, and an hour of consulting will save you a year worth of salary.
And it's not too expensive, of course, I can imagine. So
like basically, like the most important thing is for a founder of an SME to really know what they prefer themselves. So take myself as an example. I'm not somebody that provides very detailed guidance, and I have mishired on that. I have wrongly hired people that needed a lot of guidance, and in the end, that basically broke down. And after that, I actually started using, like most management consultants, we never used to use our own tools. But after those experiences, we actually really use our own medicine continuously.
So, Frodo and Egbert, I just want to jump in and clarify something. Egbert, I'm sure what you are saying is that merits are important, experience is important, but making the call, you go with the values feed. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily hire someone who doesn't understand how to fix the engine, fix an engineer. I wouldn't necessarily hire a painter as an engineer because they don't have the skills required. So there is a place for merit, But when it comes to when you're looking at 2 or 3 different people that have similar levels of merit or experience, then culture becomes the grounds for hiring. I hope that I'm clear on that.
Yes.
Definitely. I think for most jobs, that would definitely be the case. I would say that for executive positions, merit, depending on the function and the industry, might be slightly less of importance because it's more important that leaders walk the talk. But for most rank and files, definitely. If you're a doctor, I assume that you need to have certain skills. If you're an engineer, you need to have certain skills. But then, yes, culture should be the decisive factor, the cultural fit.
Thank you, Egbert. Thank you, Frodo, for your question. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Questions or comments as well? We're here to learn together. If you have a comment or a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I will call you forward to ask your comment or your question or make your comment.
I have a personal chat message here. So can we determine somebody's preferences from their nationality? I would say in general, so as Hofstede Insights, we have data in hundreds of countries. And if you don't have the budget, not even for small, like lower priced assessments, then yes, national culture is a good proxy because it's about a statistical average. The chance that somebody is completely unlike the country in which they grew up is 1 in a million. So not very high. That being said, we always advise, and it's the same for corporate culture, because every organization has multiple subcultures, and they should. The more granular you can make that data approach, the better evaluations you can form. And sometimes you do want to actively hire people that are different, but then once you have visualized the differences, you know much better how to organize your onboarding. And I think this is also something that is really important because some people need a little bit more hand holding. And once that their hand has been held during that onboarding, they're great learners, they're fast performers. But if we haven't made that time, and this is important, especially for SMEs, where it tends to be hire people and then dump people, not dump them outside the company, but dump them in the company. With a thought that, okay, you'll manage, we're a small company, you can speak up, you can talk to people. But for most of the world, this is really scary. So they really need that hand-holding period. And if as an SME, you can't afford that period, then in my opinion, don't bother hiring people.
Thank you, Egbert. Do we have any other comments? Please raise your hand or type in the chat box and we will read out your comment and respond to it. I think Egbert went offline, but he will be back in a second. Frodo?
Yes, yes, I have another question. Last week, I saw a TEDx presented by Ray Dalio. And he's the founder of Bridgewater Investments, a US-based investment company. And he's responsible for managing billions of dollars. And he has quite an interesting approach on hiring people and working with his team. And you can summarize it with the word, it's for me difficult to pronounce, but it's in Dutch, meritocratie. So it's a meritocracy, I guess. That's the probably the not so good translation of the Dutch words. What is and other companies as well are experimenting with different operating models. So meritocracy is one of them. What is your vision on that kind of model in managing a company?
I would say in cultures that are rather task-oriented and are not that hierarchical, it might work. Because it's very clear for everybody. Everybody knows the rules of the game. Everybody knows in order to proceed in this company, in order to advance in this company, you need to meet your numbers. So it's also not surprising that it comes from an American venture capitalist firm.
Mhm.
But if I come from a non-American culture, then meritocracy for me can come across as it's cold, it's distant. I don't feel they treat me as a person. I'm treated as a number. And then people can make their choices. It's the same as like the big four consulting firms. Everybody knows that they give you a lot of learning, but also everybody knows that work-life balance, forget about it. So for 4 or 5 years, especially when you're young, amazing places. But once you start having a family, they also have demands on your time. And who's going to win? The company or the family?
Mm.
So meritocracy, it can work. And again, it's in general, this whole the whole discussion on recruitment, it is about what is it that you can get away with. So, and get away with sounds perhaps negative, but what I mean with this is you make choices as an organization. And if you notice that, hey, we're not finding the right people, perhaps you made the wrong choice. And it might also be not the right choice in a specific part of the market. It might be that some of your practices will work in the US, but might not work in Nigeria. And that's kind of why my advocation would be very much also to what Ajani types there in the chat. How can we go about measuring? It definitely should be based on measurement. So my main concern, and I've worked in this field for about 2 decades, is I personally think that the old model of recruitment should be lifted upside down and inside out completely. Because we're hiring on personality. And my argument is nobody works alone. So at least the least we can do is make sure that we understand how does this person and how do their values, their preferences, their emotional preferences fit to the team in which they belong. Now, the way we go about measuring it is that as a consultancy, we have developed a couple of tools for this, which we would argue obviously are unique. But in general, whether or not you use those tools, my main advice would be if you use personality tests, please don't stop there. Make that connection to the ways in which that team works. And that requires a certain amount of skill. Because the answer will be somewhat different for every organization. And that is mainly if you want to have people that work for you for more than 2-3 years. In other words, if recruitment is a mass recruitment drive, you simply need an X amount of young engineers every year to go through your onboarding. It might be less of an issue because the recruitment is already depersonalized. But the smaller the team or the more important the function, the more I would argue that it warrants the time to invest in understanding the team dynamics, understanding the personal connection to this, because misrecruitment, meaning recruiting the wrong person, it's costly.
Yes, it is.
It will cost you 1 to 3 years of salary.
And that was a question I was about to ask you, Egbert, in terms of what is the implication of not hiring correctly. I do know that from experience that when people want to disengage from a company, they don't disengage the day they submit their resignation. They disengage mentally, usually 6 months before resignation happens. And then if you hire someone newly, as a matter of fact, it takes them 3 to 6 months before they actually get into the rhythm of the organization. So when you hire someone and the person eventually leaves, you actually have almost a year when the person is still numbing, storming, not really fitting in. So it's really important that you want to hire and keep people on. But having said that, we have just about 3 minutes to go. There's one more question from Sam, but I'll quickly read it out before we go. He says, what is your experience? He says, you see a lot of advantages about alignment, that alignment is key. Are most boards willing to discuss are most boards willing to discuss this issue, and how are they convinced to acknowledge cultural recruitment? Egbert, a quick word from you before we wrap it up.
See a picture in the chat, so I'll have a very quick look at that. I think that's actually a very nice picture, I think, from Alan in the chat in terms of, Alan, I assume the background of the picture is how people can also quickly help themselves identify a little bit what might the culture be like, correct?
Yes, that's the idea. They could look at those different questions and apply it to their organizations, because I think answering those questions will speak to a particular organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think like coming to the question about boards and their willingness, let's put it this way. To study individuals, we need a degree in psychology. Now, depending on the country, that takes 4 to 5 years of study, then a master's degree. I think and hope we can all acknowledge that groups of individuals are more complicated than an individual. Now, with that statement, what I'm trying to indicate is that culture is a complex topic. Now, my organization has been working in this field for almost 40 years. We're somewhat considered a thought leader. Our website has tons of tips and tricks on how to go about measuring culture and examples of how it's done. But it does come back to boards giving it its time. And this is where, unfortunately, most boards say, look, we'll just do a culture clinic. You've got 2 hours. This will be our cultural values. These will be our value pillars. And that's it. And unfortunately, that is not enough because those companies that really do take culture serious, they also tend to move their HR into VPs of culture and people, as it should be. Yeah. Because in my opinion, it's about understanding what is the operating system inside your organizations. Am I putting the right type of oil in my engine? And that starts with management teams and boards asking themselves a really important question that, in my experience, they hardly ever do. What is it that we get paid for? Are we as an organization aiming to have this organization in place 10, 20, 30 years from now? Or is the only thing we care for and are tasked with to ensure quarterly returns? And it's not until companies are very honest on that particular question that, in my opinion, they are ready to discuss culture. Because culture shouldn't be the goal. Culture is just a tool. It'll either make or break your company, but you do need to first have a product, you need to have a strategy, and then we can go talk about mapping out culture. So when boards are ready to discuss really what is it that they get paid for, and not their job, but their vision, their position in life as a company, then I think they are ready to talk culture.
Thank you, Egbert. And apologies to everyone. Our time is up. But do join us next week. Next week, we shall be having Frodo. Frodo will be joining us. Frodo Korf will be joining us in a session that will be reflected on by Sam De Vries and will be moderated by Lere Bale. And next week's session, we'll be talking about growth hacking. How do you manage growth, scale up and grow up as an organization very quickly? I want to thank everyone for joining us. We want to particularly thank Ellen Doka for her reflections and Egbert, my dear friend and colleague, for his presentation today. Do make it a date next week to join us for Good Morning BSN. On behalf of everyone in BSN, I say to you, good morning. Have a wonderful day. See you next week.